Welcome back to Asking for Knowledge. This is episode 18, and I'm glad to be back. This is Jeff Mabe. I'm your host. Today we're going to be talking about what I believe to be whoa, getting tongue-tied from the beginning. It's been a couple weeks, y'all, trying to get back in the flow here. But we're going to talk about what I believe to be the number one thing you might be missing when it comes to your kids' baseball development. And this could extend to softball and other sports, but of significant importance in baseball. And no, it's not athletic development, which we have talked about at length on this podcast, but it's something you may not be aware of. So this is your first time listening. Again, I'm your host, Jeff Mabe, and we have 3 episode types. So this is a version of Asking Out Loud, where it's just me on here jabbering away. Books I've read, ideas I'm thinking about, things I've experienced, things I want to dig deeper in. And that is our Asking Out Loud. We have a version called Asking the Experts, which is in development. If you've listened to prior episodes, you know once we get to episode 22, we are going to aggressively pursue those experts, to get them on here, to talk through things, to question them, to pick their brains and figure out, how far off the mark, have I been in the first 21 episodes, maybe. So we'll see. And then the last one is Asking Your Parents. So this is a version where we either bring parents on who have kind of taken their kids from the T-ball to, college scholarship phase, or all different types, not specific to parents whose children have experienced success in baseball, but trying to get a broad base of experiences there. And one of the ways we do this is through surveys. And so, go to the website, click the survey tab, and answer the questions there. Give us your feedback, and we'll synthesize it and share it on the show and talk about it. But our goal, if it's your first time ever listening, this is our goal with this podcast is to attempt to get to first principles on everything youth baseball. So specifically youth baseball, specifically the early years, and really, again, getting it down to first principles. And so what you'll find is sometimes there's not much baseball talk. We're talking about children's physical development, mental development. We're talking about motivation. We're talking about all types of different things. So if you're coming just for the X's and the O's, so to speak, you will be potentially very sad. Our core focus as an organization, so this is on the greater whole Asking for Knowledge coaching, is to help kids master the mentality, mechanics, and joy of baseball. So this podcast is an extension of that, where we just kind of verbalize and talk through some of the things that we have experienced and things that we'd like to see, and ways that we're helping kids and mistakes that we've made. So all those different types of things. So let's get into meat and taters here. It's not going to be what you think it is. So I would argue, and this is not just because of personal experience, which I'll talk about later, but I would argue that vision is probably the most important aspect that could be helping or hurting your child in baseball. Not speed, not strength, not stamina, not coordination, agility, all those things. I think it's vision. And I'll outline today the 2 types of vision that we're talking about. And then this is going to be yet another one where we go on and on and on in depth in analyzing the types of vision. One part of it, which we'll talk about first, is pretty simple and pretty easy to understand. The second part, much more nuanced, much more detailed, and that's the one where we'll really spend a lot of time in the future. So the first one is simple, cut and dry. The second one is much more open to interpretation, but also much more nuanced. So we'll talk through that. So the first part is vision, and I'm going to define this as visual acuity. So visual acuity being the ability to see. It is depth perception. It is just the ability to pick out characters, and to see things in space. So the point being here with visual acuity is this is something that we can actually measure through, different eye tests and things like that. So, you go to, if you've ever had your vision checked, 20/20, 20/30, you've heard these terms. In my case, 2500, that's what it was, years ago, but it's probably worse now without correction. But it's one of those things that we can see this, we can measure it, we can understand it. We know without a shadow of a doubt what visual acuity measures out as. And it's my belief that before we spend money on lessons or hitting instructors or anything of the like for baseball, we need to take some of that money, take the first part of that money that we're going to invest, and we need to go get our kids' eyes checked. And in my own experience, and this is not a knock on pediatricians at all, none whatsoever, but in my experience, twice, the pediatric tests, the eye tests that come along with like a standard physical are not sufficient to detect. I don't really know how to say it, but poor vision, substandard vision, anything deviating from 20/20 is typically considered, it's not perfect vision, but it's what most people, if you hear the terms like 20/20, okay, that's, it's about as good as it gets. It's not. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But, if you go and both my boys were checked and everything was fine, and it wasn't until other instances where we realized their vision was starting to suffer a little bit. And so we took them, and this was just by happening because I have an ophthalmologist. We took them to an ophthalmologist. I believe an optometrist would probably be just fine for a kid. But anyway, we took them to them and, figured out that they did indeed need some help, in the form of glasses and now eventually contacts. But why does it matter? And, I know you're probably thinking, well, like, that's self-explanatory. If they see better, they can react better to an object that's flying at them and that they're trying to hit with a bat or catch with a glove or that side of thing. But if there are any doubts related to why vision is important, if you find yourself in the camp that's like, no, I'm sticking to the pediatric, evaluation, they got the 20/20, they got the ACD, Z13, they got them all right, and that's good enough. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of David Epstein and subsequently the folks in his book, The Sports Gene. And I'm going to offer a caveat to today's episode. If you read the book, you're going to be like, holy cow, he kind of went word for word. And so as you're listening to today's podcast, be sure, just assume everything is content from that book. And if there's anything dumb, it's probably me and my own opinion. And if it's, if it's good and useful, it's probably from the book. I'm not here to try to pretend to get credit for a book that another person wrote. So I want you to understand as a listener that I am quoting liberally from this book, because the lessons are useful and they don't need paraphrase. They don't need adjusting. I can just take them straight from there and apply them to what we're talking about and to the topic today. So again, credit where it's due. David Epstein, The Sports Gene, probably mentioned it a few more times, but grab the book. You'll understand. I'm only good at taking and synthesizing and representing. So anyway, different subject, but here we go. So in 1992, an ophthalmologist named Louis Rosenbaum started his first year of research with the Los Angeles Dodgers. And, Tommy Lasorda, kind of an old school gruffy manager, wasn't crazy about this guy coming in. And so he challenged him. And the challenge was to project or predict which minor leaguers would thrive in the majors. And what's interesting about this is 1992 again. He had tons of data to pore over, but none of that data was related to the players' baseball statistics. So he strictly had to use the testing data that he was getting from the vision testing that he was doing. And as a result of this, in that first year, he chose a first baseman, not real well known, but had outstanding visual scores, and his name was Eric Karros. He was a 6th-round pick. And that year, he went on to start at first base and won Rookie of the Year and stayed in the majors for 13 full seasons. Okay. Again, he was able to predict this just off of the vision testing data that he was able to compile. Okay. So to go a little deeper on the vision testing, standard test at that time only went to 2015. And so the next year he developed a custom test that allowed him to get down to 28. So 20 over 8 is, 20/20 is 20 over 20, like 20/15, 20/. So just so if you're listening only, which you probably are, understanding it's 20/8. So the 8 replaces 20/20, which is the theoretical limit of human visual acuity. So based on the number of cones that we have in our eyes, this is supposedly the theoretical limit. So nobody can see better than this. There is not theoretical limits again. So using the new test, he had a player whose vision stood out. Now, what's interesting about this player is he was a lightly regarded catcher who was only drafted because his father was a childhood friend of Tommy Lasorda. So by all accounts, this dude should not have been where he was, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. This is an example of that. So his dad's a childhood friend of Tommy Lasorda, so he gets drafted. And I did not write down where in the draft, but it was very late, and it was kind of just a favor. Well, this player's name was Mike Piazza. And if you followed baseball for any length of time, you know he was the greatest hitting catcher of all time. Won Rookie of the Year in 93, and, the rest is history, as they say. So here's a guy that using vision testing data only predicted consecutive Rookies of the Year. What are the odds? Again, the odds are not zero, but the odds are not very good either. So let's keep it in context for what it is, in that pretty impressive, okay? And can at least give us some hint of how important vision is in success in baseball. So again, to dig a little deeper, over 4 years of testing, 387 minor and major league players, Rosenbaum found an average visual acuity of 20/13. Now, that includes pitchers as well, and pitchers' vision did not have to be quite as good. For position players, which these are position players that have to hit as well, their vision was 20/11 in the left eye and 20/12 in the right eye. If we expand this out, major and minor leaguers' vision was significantly better than collegiate players. And within just the major and minor league subset, major leaguers were significantly better. Well, I say significantly. They were better than minor leaguers. So I don't have the specific data on what the actual difference was, but suffice it to say, major leaguers were better. And so, and this is according to Rosenbaum, half of the players on the Dodgers major league roster had 20/10 vision uncorrected. So they're right at the theoretical limits of vision. Again, I think I've already said this, but here's the short version. Incredible visual acuity sets players up for success in baseball. One of the things I've done over the last few years is, I like to ask parents who are investing a significant amount of money in their child's future in sport, or in baseball specifically, if they've had their eyes checked. And many of the times I get, they checked it as a part of the physical, and, everybody moves on. And again, I'm going to kind of open with this. I'm going to bring it back around. I would probably challenge parents to go ahead on the front end, each year, before you pay for a hitting coach, before you go to the batting cages and pay for a new bat or any of that stuff, take that same amount of money, go see an optometrist, go see an ophthalmologist, and just have them checked out. Full vision check, and confirm that their vision is the best it can be. Now, I do have my own experience, so I am biased in feeling strongly about this, but I started noticing when I was 15, 16, my own vision problems, and, went to an optometrist and got some contacts, which made things a little bit better, but just couldn't quite ever get clear vision. And of course, my averages suffered, especially as I started to see better pitching. And, it turns out once I got into college, I finally saw an ophthalmologist and was diagnosed with an eye disease called keratoconus. So heavy astigmatism, really poor vision, really poor depth perception. And, it's correctable to 20/20 now, but my depth perception is still not that great. But it's one of those things, and again, this could be entirely correlational, but I do wonder if I would have had any success at all hitting if not for being a catcher and just seeing so many pitches and getting familiarity, which will kind of lead into our the next part of the today's episode. But I just wanted to say all that to say, you just never know. One of the things that our coaches will find the spin of the ball, and I'm like, bro, I see a white object. Like, I don't. What do you mean the spin of the ball? I don't see anything. Even guys when they're pitching to me and I know it's coming, I could kind of judge it, but it's not like I'm seeing the red dots and that sort of thing. It wasn't until I ended up getting the right contacts for my condition that I was finally able to pick up some of that. And it was just, I don't know, it was both joyful. It was a joyful moment and it was a sad moment all in one, because it's that what if. Well, man, golly, what if I'd have figured this out earlier? But time has passed, time is gone. All I can do is share my experiences now in hopes that if anybody else experiences something similar, they have better information to judge from. Okay, so visual acuity, that's the first part. Pure, measurable, observable thing that we can get tested. That's pretty simple. Again, I will put my stamp of endorsement. Not that it matters, but just a guy saying, hey, you may want to consider this if you're really concerned about maximizing your baseball player's ability and potential. Okay, so take it for what it's worth. First part. The second part we're going to talk about, I'm just going to call it baseball vision. It's not, I don't know that that's a really good name, but it's the best I can come up with. So we're just going to call it baseball vision, and then you can define it as you wish as time goes on. But in and around 2004, 2005, there was an elite softball pitcher named Jennie Finch. And Jennie Finch was on a show, I think it was called This Week in Baseball. And while on that show, she would go around to major league stadiums and challenge hitters as a softball pitcher from a softball distance to see if they could hit her. And it kind of kicked off with, I believe, what was a celebrity softball game where she made Albert Pujols look pretty silly. And so, following that, this is when she went on this tour visiting these teams and kind of, for lack of a better description, embarrassing the best players in the game. Some of the biggest names, including Barry Bonds. So, and if it gives you any indication, she was planning to do the same with Alex Rodriguez, and after Alex Rodriguez watched his catcher miss 3 of the 5 balls she threw, he declined the opportunity to get in the batter's box and said, "Nobody's going to make a fool out of me." That's a supposed direct quote. So he just chose to not even try. So when it comes to elite hitters, many of us would tend to believe that they have either through some genetic process or through some version of hard work, that they somehow have improved reaction time. And for many of us, it's easier to believe that it's something that can't be trained and that it can't be acquired. So we look at those guys and we say, well, Pujols just had it. Bonds just had it. They didn't develop it. It's not something they acquired. They just had this skill, and their reaction time is just so good that, they're elite, the best of the best. So it suffers the question, or it brings up the question, why did they struggle against Jennie Finch? the answer, as shared again in the book, is it's the ability to see into the future. So when Pujols was facing Finch, he had no real mental database of Finch's movements to be able to judge off of. Whereas when he's facing a baseball pitcher, which you have seen hundreds of thousands of times, he can know and judge and predict what the pitch is going to be, where the pitch is going to end up. There's a legendary story about Barry Bonds after he retired, being challenged by one of the young hitters. He was a hitting coach at the time, being challenged by one of the young pitchers. And during the at-bat, Bonds, as the ball was barely out of the pitcher's hands, would call whether it was going to be a ball or a strike. Not sure where I read that story or heard that story. I think I heard that story. But anyway, the short version is he possessed this amazing ability to know and understand where the pitch was going, where it was going to be, and whether or not he could have success in hitting it. So as Pujols is facing Finch, even if he had unbelievable reaction time, it didn't carry over. Now, an interesting side note here, Pujols was tested, and he fell into the 66th percentile when compared to a random, not elite athletes, not college baseball players, but a random sample of college students. So he didn't have and doesn't have, which he's retired now, but he did not possess anything unusual as it relates to reaction time. So what is it? Well, it's hardly what any of us would suspect. So Bruce Abernathy, who's an associate dean for research at Queensland, has found that elite athletes need less time and less visual information to know what will happen in the future without knowing it. Zero in on critical visual information. Let me read that one again. I felt like I butchered it. Elite athletes need less time and less visual information to know what will happen in the future, and without knowing it, zero in on critical visual information. So their vision is different from that of a novice. And Abernathy discusses, he says, thinking about an action, so the act of thinking is a sign of a novice in sports. In other words, Pujols can determine whether or not he would swing at a ball when it's barely out of the pitcher's hand. Barry Bonds can determine whether or not he should swing at a ball when it's barely out of the pitcher's hands. So that's a level of vision that very, very few have. And again, I'm going to call it baseball vision. You call it what you want. There's probably a technical term for it. But the point being is that thinking slows us down. So I often tell my players, think in practice. So spend that time in practice in an individual work, because you only have time to react in the games. If you're trying to think in the game, and I'm not talking about knowing situations or being aware of what's going on. I'm not talking about that type of thinking. I'm talking about reactionary thinking. So if you're in the batter's box and you're like, okay, I got to load my hands, I got to coil my hip, I got to control my forward move, I got to pivot and tilt and snap. It doesn't work that way. So again, solving this problem, and this is going to be the conversation, as I mentioned before, that's going to extend well into future episodes when we talk about a 10,000 hours approach and the level of familiarity and expertise that we should be working towards. How do we solve this? And so my fear is, and this is an interpretation based on the current state of youth baseball, but my fear is this type of thing gets misconstrued. And so we think, oh my gosh, I got to get baseball vision. I better sign my kid up for the team that plays every weekend because they need the experience. And when we're not playing, we better be scrimmaging. And when we're not scrimmaging, we better be pitching and hitting live, because that's what's going to build this baseball vision. Let's talk real life. So we just played our first weekend tournament. Man, it was great to be back on the field. Weather was great, maybe a tiny bit chilly, tiny bit windy, but we played 4 games, okay? So on average, and that's pretty standard, I think, for teams in a tournament. So on average, and I looked at the stats, prior to recording this, our players had an average of 11 plate appearances. So let's say, and I think I can say this with pretty good accuracy because we pitched chart, or we started this year, but most hitters are going to see about 4 pitches in at bat, or per plate appearance, excuse me. It's important to distinguish because if they walk, it doesn't count. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. Long story short, the amount of times they step in the batter's box in a given weekend was 11. Okay. During that, if the averages of what they're seeing is 4 to 5 pitches, then they're going to see about 44 pitches per weekend. Okay. Again, these are averages. These are rough. So that means if we played every weekend for 4 months, they would see a total, roughly an average total of 700-ish live pitches. Okay. Put that, kind of bookmark that, put that in your mind, 700 live pitches. That's playing every weekend, 4 games a weekend, every weekend for 4 months. 700 pitches, live pitches, okay? For comparison, in an average hitting session with me, my hitters will take usually about 200 swings. Swings. Not pitches, swings. Now, within that context, there are a literal million things we can do to challenge that hitter. We can put the machine close. We can work on reaction time. We can work on timing. We can do mixed pitches. We can do curveballs. We can do all kinds of cool different things to challenge their ability to get them to see the pitches fly in different planes and be able to react to them and find out how they have success to be able to hit it hard. So 200 per session, 700 for an entire season. So the short version is I can get a season's worth of experiences. And again, somebody's going to argue with me and say they're not live pitches, it's not the same. You're exactly right. You're correct. They are not the same. But when we talk about building long-term athletes with experience, which one is going to give them more experiences when it comes to a pure volume approach? And so be careful with this. I'm not in any way saying, hey, do hitting lessons 5 days a week and then play tournaments on the weekends. So let's not get carried away with this, okay? There are other factors that play into this. But my point being, let's not look at the wrong side of this and automatically assume that more is better when it comes to games. Because I see that in a trend that, you know, again, if we're not playing this weekend, we're scrimmaging. If we're not scrimmaging, we're going live against our own team doing an inter-squad thing. And I fail to understand it. So what that tells me is I probably need to have somebody that's a major proponent of it and get them on the pod and let's hash it out, talk about it, figure out what's best, and see if we can come to any version of a consensus. But at any rate, which one is going to build more experiences over time? Which approach? My take is the kids that are willing to put in the work every single day, they're going to earn the cumulative rewards of familiarity and experience that could never be replicated by playing a ton of games. Not to mention, you know, I still see games as like the reward for all the work during the week. And if it's just nothing but games, to me, you know, I don't know. It just doesn't seem as fun to me, because you're not spending that time progressing. You don't get to test yourself in that way. I mean, in a lot of ways, this past weekend was a really cool thing because the kids got to see kind of the fruit of their labors from an off season. So, you know, we hadn't played since October or maybe the first weekend in November. And so to see them back on the field and in the batter's box and to be able to use some of the things that they worked on, you know, was pretty cool. So we spent this entire off season with drills focused solely on the high level pattern swing. Now, if you watch our hitters during the first weekend, very few had the true look of the high-level pattern swing, to the extent that I was roasted online when I posted some, or on Twitter specifically, when I posted the videos of a few home runs. You know, I was shredded. You know, anything from it's not the flex you think it is to see these kids hitting these home runs to you know, just give them a year and they'll be blown up by a faster pitch in and this and that and the other, and it only works for Aaron Judge and yada yada yada. Very entertaining, by the way, if you don't mind being called a dummy, which I've not always been that way, but now I relish it because it shows me, in some cases, it's just good entertainment because it's not going to change my beliefs, but in other ways, it's a way to counter any ego that might be developing. And then you also get to see some of the hubris of other folks. So anyway, not going to digress there, but point being, we spent all off season working on the high-level pattern. So how could so few of these kids really look like it was the HLP swing, where it was noticeable? And in terms of the HLP swing, I'm talking about, you know, a controlled forward move, a call, a snap, and a tilt as the hands go. It's pretty distinct when you see it in its purest form. And so, you know, how do we have all these kids? We spent all off season, and how do we have so few that really look like HLP swingers? And here's the reality. They're not thinking when they step in the box. This is the story of vision in baseball, or baseball vision as I've defined it. Many of those kids went back to a slightly improved version of their old swing. So it's not HLP, it's some hybrid version of where they were, plus the drills that we did to make some changes. So as mentioned by Abernathy, as quoted in the book, there's no time in a game situation to think through what's going on. And so they reverted somewhat to what they did previously. But here's the reality, and here's the part that I love so much about what I do, about even this podcast and what we're talking about, is the idea of progress and growth. Okay? Are there kids out there that hits, you know, somebody said, oh, there's kids that hit 6 home runs in a weekend. This was on Twitter. You know, why are you impressed that your kids hit 6 home runs? I'm not. I'm impressed that the team hit 4 last season throughout the entire fall, through 18 games, and in one weekend we hit 6 in 4 games. I'm excited about the growth. I'm excited about the progress. Yes, I could be upset and say, golly, I taught these kids better than that. This doesn't look like HLP swings at all. I could be that guy. Or I could say, hey, they're improved. They're better than they were. Their baseball vision, in the context of what we're talking about, has improved. And so I didn't mean to get a little sidebarish and preachy there, maybe even a little emotional, but it does tear me up, because it's one of those things that progress is progress is progress. And I'm not training future major league players. I'm training 11-year-old kids. And to see those kids celebrate and have that joy coming out of the dugout, not only when they had success, but when their team had success, man, there's just few things in life that get better than that. Got a little off track. To sum it up. Okay. And we're going to go, again, we're going to deep dive into baseball vision and what it means, and the 10,000 hours concept, and some of these things that, you know, Pujols, how did Barry Bonds develop that skill with themselves? How did they do it? That we're going to get deep into that eventually. So just, you know, keep your ears open, eyes open, hit the subscribe button maybe. That way you'll know when we talk about it. Shameless self-promotion there. But understanding that baseball vision is developed, and how it's developed and what it takes to develop it is going to be one of the keys to success. So yes, we need to be athletes. We're always going to talk about that. Yes, we do need to play games to get real experience, and get feedback for the work, a reward for the work that you're putting in. But the focus needs to be on the work and not just playing a million games if you really want to lean into this concept in its fullest. So summing up today's episode, get your children's eyes checked by a vision professional, and then figure out how to best improve their baseball vision without falling into the trap of games, and more games. Okay. In the meantime, pick up a copy of David Epstein's book, The Sports Gene. Really, really good book. Again, the entire basis for today's episode, all of the content, again, anything that is worth anything, give credit to that book. Anything that's not is my opinion, my own conjecture. So hope you enjoyed it. If you are enjoying the show, I would ask that you send it to one friend. Send one episode to one friend. Maybe it's this one, maybe it's a previous one, but just send it to them and say, hey, I think you'd be interested in listening to this. You're a baseball person. You got kids in baseball. Check this out. And we'll go from there. But really appreciate you listening. Sorry for the week off. Life has been crazy. But we're back. We're back on a schedule. We'll do a weekly episode, and we'll continue from there. So, again, hope you enjoyed the show. Have a great week. And until next time, keep asking for knowledge.